Hello, everybody. Welcome
Hi.
back. Super excited to see. Well, I guess we can't really see, but to be in this space where we're talking with our peoples again. How are you today, Lonnie?
I'm okay. It's a new year, so I always feel like I'm sort of opening a new notebook, like fresh. I always loved fresh notebooks at the beginning of the school year. So I
Mhm.
kind of feel like that when the calendar changes.
Yes, yes. And I
Fresh
mean,
notebook.
from this new notebook, new year perspective, I think about how, so many people enter into this space having reflected over their past experiences and
Right.
thinking about the successes and the challenges that they faced, and even set some goals or aspirations for things that they want for that new year.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like, from that particular perspective, even though maybe we weren't entirely intentional to have it aligned, what we're going to get into today for our third episode of our podcast, Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum, it taps into those reflections that people had and, those lessons that people wanted to learn in writing the DRK-12 grant, but now having received it and are trying to implement it in practice.
Right. So noticing those gaps between what they imagined and what their reality is and the
Mhm.
lived experience of running the grant.
And I mean, thanks to your creativity, we've titled this episode, If I Knew Then What I Know Now, where we're talking to bright, young, emerging scholars who are doing good critical work within the K-12 Directorate and who have received DRK-12 grants, either collaborative grants or sole career grants. Um, and having gotten the grant and done or started the process of implementing it, we really wanted to tap in with them and see sort of what they've been learning along the way and how, through reflecting on those lessons, they could share words of wisdom for people who are in the process of writing grants so that we can be a lot more intentional in our writing process to account for some of those potential hiccups or challenges that people run into with implementing projects.
Yeah. I mean, part of the challenge of writing a grant proposal is you have to make your best guess about what you're going to be able to do in the period of the grant. And, you know, things are always changing, and education is a really complex enterprise.
Mhm.
And so, we get a little bit better at guessing, but so far I've never been 100% right in what I imagine in my proposal and what we're able to actually execute. But you do learn some things. And so Terrell and I thought that by asking two really outstanding junior folks about their experiences as new PIs, we might be able to capture some of that wisdom as it's taking shape right now in their own life and career as researchers. So the question Terrell and I asked our two colleagues, who we'll introduce in just a moment, are: what are two lessons that you would teach your past self about what to consider when writing a grant, given your post-award experiences? And in particular, part of what you have to imagine when you're writing a grant proposal is you have to imagine the grant infrastructure
Mhm.
and how that infrastructure, the team, the timeline, the activities, the partners, so on, how are you going to use that to achieve your grant goals? So
Mhm.
that's what we asked our two colleagues.
And so, in trying to get words from the wise in real time, our first participant is Dr. Christine Lee Bae. Dr. Lee Bae is an associate professor of foundations of education at Virginia Commonwealth University. Her background is in educational psychology, where she studies engagement, motivation, science teaching, and learning within urban classroom context. Dr. Christine Lee Bae has obtained multiple DRK-12 grants, participating in them either as a postdoc or a co-PI or even a PI, One of those grants being the career grant that she's actually going to share insights on with us today, which she was awarded in 2019. And the grant was titled Building on Diverse Students' Funds of Knowledge to Promote Scientific Discourse and Strengthen Connections to Science Learning in Urban Classrooms.
Great.
Who did you get a chance to talk to, Lonnie?
I got to talk to Cathery Yeh, who I have really admired her work from afar. So it was fun to have a chance to chat with her. She is an assistant professor of STEM education and a core faculty member in the Center for Asian American Studies at UT Austin. Her research examines the role race, class, gender, and language play in the constructions of mathematical ability. This is her first NSF grant as a PI, and the title of her collaborative project is Developing and Researching K-12 Teacher Leaders Enacting Anti-Bias Mathematics Education, or the DREAM Project for short. And that project is examining, exactly, it's a great title, examining the mathematics teacher professional development that explicitly addresses bias reduction. So they have a project team that involves three other co-PIs, and they are partnering with, they aim to partner with 3 school districts that are serving racially, ethnically, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse communities for a 2-year PD program to help develop ways of reducing bias in the classroom.
Oh, wow. That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's ambitious work.
Yes.
Exciting.
Which I think brings us to like sort of that first lesson that both Cathery and Christine shared. And we kind of synthesized that lesson around the importance of year 1 of the project. And so for people who have multiple year projects, you know, we're jumping into these grants thinking, oh, well, this is what we want to accomplish because big picture wise, this is how these pieces fit within this design that we're implementing. And then it's like, hey, year 1, here's your money. Now it's time for you to do the things that you're said that you're going to do. And so when I was talking to Christine about year 1, one of the things that she shared was that it was important for year 1 to be an administration year and a project launching year. She said, and she quotes, you know, and I quote, because it's one thing to conceptualize a project, it's another thing to implement it. And, you know, like I said, I spent a year just thinking about this project and writing it. So for Christine, year 1 was very important because prior to receiving her career grant, which she noted was she got it on her first round, which is very awesome. She spent about a whole year prior to the grant proposal submission, just trying to be intentional in conceiving the project and developing its ideas. And despite all of that time that she put in, year 1 comes and she still wishes that she would have had that year 1 as an administration year or a project launching year.
My career project is a research partnership with classroom teachers. And, you know, in terms of infrastructure to start, maybe broad, here's what my team looks like. You've got me as the PI, and I talk about this with my partner, and he says, oh, so you're the CEO of this company. And I'm like, okay, I guess if you make an industry parallel. And then I have a postdoc who might be like a senior manager. Then I have my graduate students and then undergraduate students. So that's kind of the university team. Then I have my partnership team. So this is my classroom teachers, and I have I have my teacher leaders, and I have my teachers who are participating. And then I have my district partners who are at the research and assessment office, and also the science specialists who support with approval and, more importantly, alignment of what we're doing with what their school division and schools are doing. So, if I could go back to my past self, one of the things I knew that all these players had to be somewhere in the proposal. I had to think about budget lines for each of these key stakeholders. But what I wish I had thought of a little bit more when I was writing the proposal was, when should these folks come in, and what exactly do I want them to do? What are their unique roles and responsibilities and strengths that are going to be complementary to one another? So, as an example, what I didn't realize being PI for the first time is how I don't get to be always in the weeds thinking and writing and reading articles. I start becoming, it's very top level. I'm now a fiscal manager. I have to make sure my budgets are aligned. I need to recruit, interview, onboard all of the people I just mentioned, all the key team members. I need to attend partnership meetings and build and sustain those partnerships, and then advising and all the things that faculty do.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. I like how she lays it all out there. The role of PI and all that it encompasses, which I think when you are a first-time PI can come as a little bit of a shock, even if, like Dr. Lee Bae, Christine has done, she's been a co-PI on other grants. So it's not like she's new to research grant work, but when your vantage point shifts from co-PI to PI, there's a lot more administrative, and I think she captured that really well.
Yeah, I mean, she talked about things like IRBs and scheduling meetings and,
Right.
writing job ads to hire people. And then those interviewing process is all of these administrative tasks that you have to do and just getting the project started that, from her reflection, something she would have done was built in an administrative year in year one. And she even mentioned being intentional about bringing in like a project manager in year one, as opposed to bringing in, say, a postdoc or a research scientist whose job is more scholastic in, driving the research and innovation of the project.
Yeah. I think because Cathery's grant was a collaborative grant, they did build in a development year for team building, and she's really, really grateful that they did. One of the things she told me is that she said so much happens from the time you submit your proposal to when it gets funded, and they actually had the pandemic happen in between, and like all the anti-CRT laws and all of the things that have kind of popped up in 2019, 2020. So they were really grateful to have built in that development work, not just to sort of refocus and re-engage the work in the shifting context, but she also was talking about the importance of that development work as they came together as a team around this intention of anti-bias professional development. Here, I'll cut to her. I'll let her tell us about what that looked like for their team.
Reflecting upon ourselves, engaging in anti-bias work that centers on racial equity, with a group of scholars who are white and Asian American. We also focused on seeking advice and expertise from groups of teachers and teacher leaders who are folks of color as well, that are engaging in anti-bias work on a daily basis. So that year one allowed us to really think about refining what the anti-bias framework means in practice, but also a year of learning. That year of learning, allowing us this development year, I think is allowing, now we're in year two, I think is really critical.
So, yeah, go ahead. What are you
No,
hearing?
I was just saying, like, for her to know that going into this project, doing anti-bias work, it seems like for Cathery and their team, they wanted to be very intentional with how they were engaging anti-bias research, anti-bias frameworks. And so it was more than just having the award and doing the project, but really trying to, I almost want to say, like, cultivate it in a way that was contextually appropriate and culturally rich.
Yeah, I think what I've learned as a PI is that year one, I would take a little bit from Christine's insights and a little bit from Cathery's insights, that you need that time to kind of build your team, talk to your partners, recalibrate, retool, make sure everyone's on the same page. But I think that it's good to have an intellectual component to it, like what Cathery talks about too, really figuring out what does an anti-bias framework mean, integrated, for PD and the way that they're working on it. So I know that NSF likes us to make intellectual projects that we can share, products rather, that we can share with the scholarly community. So one way to kind of ask yourself as a PI as you're developing the grant is, yes, I need that year to kind of build my team, hire my postdoc, figure out, like, check in with my partners, but is there an intellectual product that I can contribute to the DRK-12 community and the broader ed research community that could represent that work? So I ask myself that. So sometimes I've done things like do a secondary analysis of existing data as we try to build a framework or build a process. I'll maybe try to write about pilot data that we're collecting. I don't know. Have you ever thought about, like, do you have a strategy, a go-to strategy for year one, or maybe, like, are you thinking of strategies you might use in the future?
Yeah. So for one of my current projects, this large 8.8 million collaborative racial equity grant that I received with a phenomenal team, year one has really been a calibration year. It's been, yes, these are the things that we promised. Now, what does it look like in practice? Who do we actually need to bring on? So it does get into a lot of that. Who are we hiring? Why are we hiring them? Kind of stuff. But then also, what kind of positionalities and perspectives do people need to maintain? How can we collect meaningful, rich ethnographic data from those sites to then understand how we can begin to implement this research? So yeah, there's been strategies both administration-wise in terms of what project management software do we need to use?
Yeah.
How often are we meeting? Who's taking on what responsibilities? Are we doing a multi-site IRB, or is everybody having one IRB?
Yep.
And yeah, if you're
I'm
doing
aware of that particular headache.
I'm doing all of these big eyes right now because I'm thinking about the multiple rounds of revisions that we've gone through with the IRB process, just as a brief riff. But it's like, if you really are doing equity work, thinking about, because I know you said that with Cathery's project, it was about race and sociolinguistics and socioeconomic status. There might be people that you're trying to engage in this project who don't have protections. And so you have to constantly be thinking through, well, yes, this is what I want to do, but how does that impact the community? What am I actually asking people to sacrifice in this process of doing the work? And then administratively, how does that reflect in my IRB? So yeah, it's a lot of intellectual work. And one of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we actually document that? Because I know, like, within the learning sciences backgrounds that we both share, people study interdisciplinary collaboration.
That's right.
And there's so much that can be put out there from that perspective.
Now, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but that's a really great segue to the second theme that we heard from our colleagues.
Just kind of riffing, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, they both talked about how important it was to have the right team. and that was something that, you know, they both felt that they built in really intentional ways into their proposal, but then that there was still more ongoing thinking about what it means to have the right team as a part of this sort of taking stock year one development year, getting more specific about what, for example, in Cathery's project, what an anti-bias framework looks like in their context in this current moment. So, you know, they both talked about the importance of thinking about the complementary expertise of their teams and what you need from whom and in what position and capacity. So Cathery talked about part of what happened during year one is that they really took an inventory about their team's expertise in relation to the problem that they're working on. You know, one of the co-PIs, Rebecca Elliott, has a deep knowledge of professional learning and teacher development, and Eva Thanheiser has a really deep ways of thinking about mathematical modeling and applications of math in the real world. And another co-PI, Ruth Heaton, she leads teachers development group. So her whole work right now is about working with families and communities around teachers' professional development. So they can kind of see what puzzle pieces they have, but they also noted that there's some gaps that they're missing. And so by hiring their postdoc for this to start in their second year, they could be intentional about trying to find a postdoc whose area of focus was not someone necessarily in math ed, because all the rest of the team had a math ed focus, but maybe expertise in something like ethnic studies or, you know, community partnerships or something else that really might fill in the whole picture for them. So I think that team building piece is just really crucial, and giving yourself the space as a PI to find ways to backfill after you've kind of done that initial assessment is really critical.
Yeah, so when Christine was talking about her team, again, she had the career project, and, you know, with career, the PI is supposed to be the only quote unquote lead researcher, but you can have other people supporting. She talked about intentionally wanting to recruit people who were not clones of her. She said that, you know, I'm good at what I'm good at, but there's some things that she needs to complement her, like you were saying earlier. So she shouted out two of her graduate students, Martinique Seeley and Lauren Cabrera, recognizing that in putting out an all call for graduate assistants, she was looking for people who had prior classroom K-12 experience, who had boots on the ground work with doing equity, who had desires of entering into the academy, and who had science backgrounds. And she just talked about how lucky she was to have Martinique and Laura come to her through the application process because of them meeting these distinct intellectual and methodological needs that she had for that project. And those needs being ones that would complement her own expertise as an educational psychologist who's done work in science learning context. But one of the things that I also think about in terms of like my conversation with Christine, and will actually let her share that in her own words, is not only just being intentional around a person's conceptual and methodological expertise, but then also being intentional around the team's positionality in doing equity work. And Lonnie, you know, you and I have talked about this on all of our conversations so far, you know, how we truly value equity and our own perspectives at equity, and how we're very intentional in what we do when we say equity. And so I appreciated, you know, Christine sort of reflecting over her own positionalities in relationship to doing equity work and in thinking about the people that she would bring in on her team. And so this is what she shares.
This part is a little bit complicated, but, you know, as an Asian American female running a equity focused career grant working in urban contexts, in California, it was serving primarily Latinx student population. Here on the East Coast, it's primarily Black students in the classrooms that we're working in. I wanted to make sure that my team is representative and has members who are representative of the communities that we're working in. And I was also reading my student applicants' personal statements to look at, are you not only interested in understanding teaching and learning in classrooms, but are you interested in forwarding more equitable opportunities and expanding opportunities for historically underserved students? One person can't be everything, right? But those were kind of the things that I was looking for in terms of selecting graduate students to be on the team.
So I hear her being really, really intentional about not only people's backgrounds, experiences, expertise, and interests, but their social positions and social histories to bring to the work that she's doing. And I think that's very, very clear in that statement, that that's important to her. That's cool.
And it kind of made me think about something Cathery had shared earlier in terms of like how she understood the identities of their research team and the work of doing anti-bias work. And I just wonder, did she talk more about like the team's positionalities in that development year and how they were trying to understand how to approach the work?
Yeah. And I mean, I think she did, especially because I think the experience of being Asian American in California, which is where Cathery was before she came to Texas, is very different than being Asian American in Texas and in the South in terms of how people perceive and read you. And so I think that that was a shift for her. It's not only people's own positionalities, but looking at the communities that they want to engage with and the policy context and political context that folks are in, and that both educators and the communities that they serve. But I think this issue of team development, I mean, the problems that we take on in educational research are often so complex and so multifaceted, and really it's probably not going to happen that any of us have a team of PIs and doc students and postdocs and everything that is able to cover every facet of expertise that we might need for problems, especially because, like Cathery said earlier, what happened in the culture between when they proposed and when they got the grant, the pandemic, the anti-CRT laws, that is a lot to kind of retool and respond to. So I'm wondering, Terrell, if we might talk a little bit with folks about other strategies that PIs can use and think about when they're developing their proposals, to have sort of in their back pocket to make sure that they have access to the kinds of expertise they might need to address these emerging kinds of issues that come up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christine put it best. She said one person can't do it all, can't be it all. And so separate from your co-PIs or your postdocs or even graduate students, there are other forms of expertise that you may need to really implement a project, though that person may not necessarily be a boots on the ground type person.
Right.
So, thinking about ways people have done that, there's advisory boards, there's external consultants.
Right.
Yes, you may bring in an external evaluator, but the lens that the evaluator has offers a certain level of expertise in terms of how you can be intentional and filling in some of those gaps and the blind spots that we all carry, just because of the fact that, again, one person can't do it all, can't be it all, and can't see it all.
Yeah. So
sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Well, no, I was just going to say in terms.
Go ahead, Terrell.
No, we're both really passionate. Just really quick. Yeah, just, in terms of thinking about infrastructure for projects, you want to build in that capacity if you have the opportunity to do so.
That's great. Yeah, I was just going to say that I've done grants that don't use external evaluators, but that have advisory boards, because my research is primarily qualitative. And so I think that there's a lot to think about in terms of grant infrastructure in how you compose your advisory board and the kinds of expertise you bring in. I can tell you that I've had conversations with advisory board members while my grants in project process that save me and my team so much reading and thinking, because just having that one person who knows a whole literature and knows a whole field, so you come up with some challenge you're facing and they're able to say, okay, so here's the history of this idea, here's the kind of ways people have thought about it, here are the current debates, go. And, and they're able to do that in 1 hour, where that would be hours and hours of labor and thinking, and we might not even quite get to that succinct lens that it can bring to the table. So don't underestimate your advisory boards. Be really intentional about how you put them together and use them. Because I've sometimes been asked to be on an advisory board for grants, and like the grants get funded and like maybe I get called in once. So I know that people sometimes underutilize their advisory boards, but you've budgeted for their honoraria, and we all live on Zoom now. You can have that 1 hour conversation that might be just full of gems. Just doing it on Zoom. You don't even need to fly people in anymore. And also, maybe even one time we were trying to put together an advisory board meeting, and we were just having a heck of a time finding dates that everyone could be there. And some stuff had come up in the project that our original advisory board didn't fully cover. So we asked a couple of colleagues to kind of pinch hit as advisors. And honestly, it kind of worked out for us because their expertise was more salient to the problems that had come up that we didn't anticipate when we were writing the proposal. So it wasn't a change in budget. It was just a change in who was filling the role. And it ended up serving us really well.
And that makes me think of 2 points. One, I know that you shared in like our behind the scenes conversation that Cathery had mentioned in terms of the types of expertise that people bring. For me, knowing that I'm engaging work that draws on, critical theories of like race and identity and justice is very important for me to have scholars who study that, even if they're not necessarily educational scholars.
That's right.
Because as an applied science, education borrows from so many different backgrounds.
That's right.
So tapping into experts from ethnic studies or cultural studies or women and gender studies or sociology or anthropology has been very beneficial for me as I've looked to think intentionally about race and racism and oppression. And like you said, it saved me a lot of time, because while I might go into Google and try to Google search some literature, I don't know the validity or credibility of that scholarship if I'm not thoroughly immersed in that space.
Right.
So, talking to people who are thoroughly immersed, they can point you to the pieces, they can help condense and synthesize some of the history and even help draw out key points for consideration.
That's right.
And then I think the other thing that I thought about too when you were sharing was, sometimes people feel like with the advisory board, you have to get everybody around the round table together and all of the knights have to be able to give advice. And that's not always true. Like you could engage your advisory board on a one-on-one type basis based on the needs of the project and where you are. As long as you're engaging them based off of what you shared and they're bringing in the thoughts that you need to implement the project, it doesn't have to be all of the people coming together at the table at one time.
Right. And different advisors have different things they can offer. So for example, in my current project, we're doing a lot of work in schools with teachers and professional development with teachers. And one of my advisors is a 30+ year veteran teacher who I've known for a really long time and implicitly trust. And I am not asking him to read papers or comment on academic proposals, but I am inviting him to come to one of our sessions that we're doing with teachers, because I want to get his hit on what he thinks like the work with teachers is like, and if he has feedback for us on how we can make it stronger, because that's his expertise and that's a role he can take on the work. So, yes, what you ask of your advisory board does not have to be uniform. I like that. All right.
So, I know that
we
we've
get to our
covered.
last theme.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know that we've covered this idea of the development year and being intentional around building in time in your timeline to administratively get things done and to conceptually come together and really understand the context that you're going to be working in, how to apply the work, even if that requires internal reflection and development. And I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about the team and being intentional around not just the conceptual and methodological expertise, but tapping into external forms of expertise as you're implementing the project and recognizing that there may be gaps in what you know or don't know, so that the project runs smoothly. But I kind of want to go to one point that you shared earlier that taps into like our last theme and strategy. And you had talked about like the importance of the community and the participants and the people that you're engaging in this process. And I know that you had said that Cathery was speaking on like how she and her team had reflected on that. And I want the audience to be able to really get into some of that good information.
Yeah. So the last theme is really about this issue of feasibility. And that does have a lot to do with the community that you're engaging, the partners you're engaging. Cathery was talking about how one of the things she would have told her past self was about feasibility, particularly in relationship to community and community partners. And so I'll let her discuss how that looked for her.
When we went back to our budget and we looked at how we were providing honorariums and for the work that teachers and communities were doing, we realized that we had to shift our budget, that asking families and paying them $200 a year really was not enough, because if they're going to be coming into schools all day, they should be paid a day's salary.
Yeah.
So having to shift our budget and shifting how we're using our funding differently from what we had proposed.
Budgets is definitely critical in terms of writing your grants and understanding the feasibility of your project. And I guess what I appreciate about that quote is, in recognizing the criticality of the budget, Cathery was sharing, you have to really be equitable and do right by the participants that you're bringing into this space, that you're asking to do a lot of labor and give a lot of time and intellectual thought, even if we don't always honor that fund of knowledge as intellectual thought.
Yeah. And I think that's very clearly, from talking to Cathery, a commitment that she and her team share, is really wanting to honor community knowledge and positioning them as experts who have important expertise to share with the project team. And I think sometimes it's easy in writing a budget. There's so many rules and regulations and costs around university folks and doc students and postdocs and healthcare and all the things like that, that it's important to make sure that our partners, whether they're teachers or youth or families or whatever, that we're compensating them in a way that reflects an investment and an appreciation for their expertise. And I think that became really clear to her and her team. And I think that sometimes too, to do this work in an authentic way where you're building relationships, you're really taking the time to listen to people. Sometimes the scales we feel like we should be able to do when we're just working on a project conceptually turn out to maybe be a little ambitious. And
Mhm.
I've seen this a lot as a member of people's advisory boards, but Cathery definitely and her colleagues felt the same thing. She said that their original proposal had them doing work with lesson study and working in families and communities in 3 different districts, and that includes a bunch of like lesson cycles, and so they would be in schools like 9 weeks of the year. But when you think about faculty time and doc student time, it's not really something to do if you want to take the relationship part of the work seriously.
Mhm.
So I think that thinking about feasibility partly has to do with budget and partly has to do with scale. Did
Mhm.
Christine have anything to say too about some of the feasibility issues?
Yeah, no, she definitely talked about this idea of time. Uh,
Mhm.
and she mentioned how, especially from a career award stance, most of the time, well, to be eligible for a career award, you cannot have tenure, which means that as an assistant professor or as a junior scholar, you're new to the politics of research and faculty life at whatever institution you're working in. And
Mhm.
so there's all of these institutional politics that you're trying to learn. There's the job responsibilities of a faculty member, and then there's the job responsibilities associated with the research project, where for her, also being intentional to do deeply connected, community engaged work, there's relationship building, there's all of these multiple partners that she named: district partners, assessment coordinators, teachers, university
Right.
partners. And so that then becomes time that you have to allocate towards how you're scaffolding and cultivating and bringing them into the project and supporting them when all of these uh-ohs and challenges and oopsies come into play,
Absolutely.
like a pandemic, which you have no control over, but
That's
totally
right.
just changes everything. And so from a feasibility stance, she was really just saying, the more intentional that you can be with building in time in your project, and the more methodical and strategic you can be in terms of thinking about, again, that year 1 of a development year. And I'm gonna add on my own little thing at the end, writing years.
Yeah.
So you can be sure to, you know, try as best as possible, develop and think of a project that's an appropriate scale. But if you get into the situation and you're realizing that you're not able to do it all, figuring out what is that wiggle room that you've built in so that you can kind of readjust the scale of the work. She talked a lot about not wanting to overstress, and I think that that's important even now in terms of how the pandemic has taught us how people are being intentional about their
Yeah.
mental health and well-being,
Right. That's right.
and how there's much more to life than our professional selves.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
when you said being intentional about not overstressing, is she thinking about herself, her team, the partners, everybody?
everybody. Yeah, in terms of just what becomes the right infrastructure and what becomes the right sequencing of onboarding of people, so that she, as the leader, is not stressed in trying to onboard everybody simultaneously while also trying to do all of the other things. And then them as the participants and partners, or research assistants, are not stressed as they're also trying to learn the project and deliver their part of the project.
Yeah. Can I throw in another little piece of wisdom here?
Yes,
Um,
please.
One of the things that I do for some of those little odd jobs that come up in the course of a project, aside from a project manager who can sort of help you see the big picture and make sure all the parts move as they should and so on, and just as a good central point person for problem solving that things that come up. But like I've sometimes hired undergraduates
Mhm.
For small tasks like building a website or, doing some first level data cleaning, transcript cleaning, or, things that don't require the kinds of expertise that doctoral students have, but where it can be a labor saving device so that my doctoral students aren't having to go through a transcript and fixing the typos and putting in pseudonyms or whatever. And undergraduates, we have great undergraduates at Vanderbilt, and we've had some who actually ended up co-authoring stuff with us and presenting it because they get so into it. So you never know, you can start an undergraduate with something that's sort of a simple task, but then they can potentially grow into it. And that's kind of a really cool opportunity for my doc students to mentor a
Mhm.
younger person, a younger scholar. But it also, from the point that Christine was making about trying to manage people's time so that the work that they're doing is meaningful, I think that's really important, and it can be a helpful strategy. But I think the other thing that both Cathery's project and Christine's project have in common, and I think a lot of DRK-12 projects have as a component, is this partnership work.
Mhm.
And I think if you do meaningful partnership work, you can't have your time so tightly allocated that these oopsies, as you called them, that come up, these misunderstandings, these new circumstances, this new policy that comes down in the district, whatever it is, you need to build in check-in times. You
Mhm.
need to make sure that they feel heard. You
Mhm.
need to make sure that their concerns have space to be aired and addressed,
Yes.
And I think if we get too focused on like how all the pieces are going to fit together and don't leave room in our designs for that relationship part to come out, it can actually make the whole thing fall apart. So I think that's part of what Cathery and her team were realizing when they were talking about the scale issue, is
Mhm.
it's hard to have all the space to do the authentic, connecting, listening, respectful work that they want to do at too large of a scale.
Mhm.
So that's a
And that's,
tension.
yeah. No, and I mean, it's making me think about how important it is to not see that as invaluable. I think about how in some of the ed psychology spaces that I sit in, you have people that talk about soft skills versus hard skills. And, the social emotional stuff is the soft skills and the hard skills is all of this other kind of stuff. But it's like, yeah, people are people. They're not
Yeah,
products. They're not robots. They're not tools for you to manipulate. Uh,
right.
and so having time built in for relationships, especially if you're working with marginalized communities. And then if you think about just from an infrastructure perspective, power from a university stance versus power from a classroom teacher stance, that adds to how you should be thinking about voice and perspectives and building out time for those relationships. That's a whole nother episode I think that we're going to have to do in terms of just like
Yeah,
relationships in research, because I mean, research has a hard stigma of coming in and taking from communities and
that's
leaving.
right. Being extractive. Yeah. Yeah, we can definitely, I feel the tangent, the pull
Mhm.
of that tangent, but I think we should resist it for now. But yes, for
Yes,
sure. That's
yes.
definitely something we should think about. It's interesting too, like when I step back and think about the two scholars that we talked to, they are both doing kind of partnership work. So I imagine some of this infrastructural needs might be different if you were doing something that had a different kind of design.
Mhm.
And, we'd love it if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to put in the comments some of your ideas about the infrastructure needs that you've seen on your projects. That would be awesome.
Yes. And if you happen to see it on Twitter or Facebook or any of the other cadre spaces, please, please, please share your thoughts and your perspectives. Because again, it gives us, Lonnie and I, the opportunity to hear from the community that we're trying to speak to and speak with.
Yeah.
And it allows us to have deeper theorized perspectives about,
Right.
future episodes and how we're going to move forward. Now, if I do recall, this is the last episode of this particular season in terms of
Yes.
uncovering the hidden curriculum. Lonnie, this has been fun.
It's been great, Terrell. Yeah. I mean, it's really easy to get into the weeds with you, but try to think about the big picture at the same time. So I really appreciate that about our conversations.
Yes, and I appreciate all of the wisdom that you bring to this and just your level of thought to it, because sitting here listening and contributing, I'm also learning so much in terms of how I can improve and enhance my own skill sets as a researcher, as a PI, as an administrator. So thoroughly have enjoyed doing this season with you and looking forward to the next season. As a recap from today's session,
Thank you. Yes, recap us.
being intentional with your year one, so building in a development year, administration year in your project, if you can, is highly recommended from our two phenomenal scholars. Being intentional around your team and cultivating that teamwork is very important. Thinking about positionalities, forms of expertise, approaches to the work, and how they can complement one another rather than clone each other. And as we added, going external to your advisory boards or other forms of experts when you get into spaces where you don't necessarily have that boots on the ground type person. And then I think the last one was about the feasibility and being intentional around how within your budgets and your timeline and your sequencing, you're accounting for voice and relationships and the responsibilities of your participants and the communities that you're serving so that they are heard, they're seen, they're valued, and their knowledge is appropriately compensated.
Right. Good. And I would also add to that last one, just making sure the scale of your design allows you to do those things, that you're not putting yourself in tension with some of those commitments.
Yes.
So,
but yes, now, thank you so much.
thank you and happy 2023, everybody.
Take care. Enjoy.
Bye.